Hello and welcome back to the Beginner's Guide to Horror Games, Part 2. Think of this video as a large recommendation video. What we're going to be doing is continuing the work laid down from the first video, which I recommend if you're new to horror games and want to know where to start and where to go from. This video will not be containing any prices unlike the last video. The price of things has been changing rapidly, and some of the things from the last video only 6 months ago are already out of date. So instead of listing all the prices, I'm going to be showing the game and listing what it's released on, as well as what games it's similar to from the previous video on screen as I talk about the games. We're once again starting with Amnesia: The Dark Descent. As I stated in the previous video, I think it's really a solid starting position for horror games, since it was the starting point for me. It's got puzzles, light survival mechanics, lacks the combat, and really has a good story. So if you've played the game and can figure out which aspects of these 4 things you want more of going forwards, this is where the recommendations come from. Upcoming are games that have more of an action combat focus than Amnesia, games that have more survival elements, games that are more focused on the puzzles, and finally games that are more about the story or experience than the gameplay. Feel free to use the chapter selection to skip to parts of the video you feel you might be more interested in. Up first is combat. If you played Amnesia and desired the means to fight back or take the fight to the enemy, then there's a lot of games with a horror focus that lets you do that. Doom 3 is a survival horror game where all hell has been unleashed on the futuristic Mars base, and you, as the Marine, must send it back to where it came from using good old-fashioned firepower. The horror elements come mostly from the gore and the lighting, as well as a few jump scares to keep you on your toes. The game came in 2 varieties, with the original release and the BFG edition. The BFG edition comes with the original expansion pack, Resurrection of Evil, as well as a new expansion called The Lost Mission, which you can't get individually. The BFG edition also comes with the first 2 original Doom games, some graphical improvements, checkpoints, better sound design, and a change to the way the flashlight worked. The flashlight alteration was a big change to the way the atmosphere worked between the 2 editions of the game, with the BFG edition letting you use your flashlight with any gun at any time, but the original game forced you to switch between the flashlight if you wanted to see where you were going. This did play harder into the horror elements, so consider this when you're deciding which version to get. Afraid of Monsters is a mod for the original Half-Life where you play as David Leatherhoff, who experiences a drug-fueled nightmare. The game is fast and frantic, with the combat itself being where most of the frightening elements come from, and some surprisingly good monster design for something on the Half-Life engine. The game being a mod is available for free as long as you have Half-Life for the game to run on.
Back in your cell. Everything's under control.
The Suffering is a third-person horror shooter where you play as Torque, a death row inmate who possesses a deadly secret, and a blurry past he doesn't quite remember. The game mostly focuses on scripted events and jump scares as you try and break out of a prison and deal with your past as the monsters are unleashed onto the facility. The game has a morality system and a lot of interesting creature designs. Clive Barker's Undying is a 2001 gothic horror first-person shooter where you play as Patrick Galloway, an Irish paranormal investigator brought to the family home of a close friend who's terrified that he and his family have been cursed, and he wants Patrick to get to the bottom of it. The game was created by Clive Barker, the man behind Hellraiser, and the game's horror elements are mostly in its story and cutscenes, and the various spooky things you can uncover with the powers at your disposal, revealing things that aren't there. The combat is pretty fun, but it's not exactly a scary game. Tropang 2 is a bullet-time first-person shooter with horror elements. You play as a captive who's broken free and joined an organisation that deals with anomalous things, and you're sent on missions to resolve them, mostly by shooting them. Cryostasis is a first-person shooter horror game that takes place on board a frozen ship lodged into the ice, and you're tasked with freeing the boat and its past. The game opens with melee combat before adopting guns and keeps its scares going along with unsettling cutscenes and the heavily atmospheric ship, but eventually it just devolves into mainly combat. The game requires several patches to run properly. It's notoriously buggy on most systems, sadly.
You my wood right in their fucking nest. Shit. That's so loud. It's got the wall!
Metro Last Light follows the events of Metro 2033. You play as Artyom as he tries to stop an all-out war from breaking out in the Metro tunnels. The game has a bit less of a horror focus and more on shooting, but still has a great atmosphere and some pretty scary moments. Though my footage is from the older Complete Edition, the Redux version is widely available and, to my understanding, pretty much the same. The Callisto Protocol is a third-person action horror game that follows Jacob Lee, a starship captain hauling goods that crash lands on a prison planet and is taken in as a prisoner before even that goes wrong when a prison break leaves the place in ruins. The game focuses more on melee combat and is more gory than scary, with some really great sound design.
Too late. Someone had destroyed the circuit breaker. There was no way to get the lights back on.
Rusty!
The ground was covered with fading patches that looked like liquid darkness.
Alan Wake is a third-person shooter with spooky elements that tells the tale of the writer Alan Wake and his life turned upside down by the events at Cauldron Lake that seems to take his wife and alter everyone's memory. The game's quite combat heavy throughout, but has a pretty great story with some tie-in music.
Oh my god.
Resident Evil 5 takes you to Africa with Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine as they try and stop the outbreak of the deadly mutagenic virus against an old foe. The game is very combat heavy, and whilst it features limited inventory, the game is very generous with ammo and is actually really fun in co-op. Nightmare Creatures is a third-person action horror game that follows two protagonists as they try and stop a deranged madman from unleashing monsters onto Victorian London. The game isn't far off from Bloodborne on PlayStation 1. It can be hard and frustrating and features a great deal of old-school difficulty and the problems that come along with that. But its atmosphere and combat are pretty enchanting for the similar Victorian London vibe the game has in common with Bloodborne. Lunacid is a first-person RPG with horror elements. You explore the twisting, interconnected world of the Great Well and build your character up to defeat the horrors that lurk inside. The game has a really, really good atmosphere, and the combat can be pretty varied depending on what sort of build you go for. The horror elements lie mostly in its story and atmosphere.
See. My last case opened me a new fear, a real fear, a fear of myself, what I am, and of what I've always been. All that I was is now lost. Hope, purpose, pleasure, all meaningless. I now walk in the shadows between worlds, and it is there I have finally glimpsed upon what lives in the dark corners of the earth.
Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth is probably the best Lovecraftian game with the Cthulhu title. It follows a private investigator as they get wrapped up in the events around Innsmouth, and after an incredibly atmospheric night in the town, the locals start to come after you. The game does devolve into combat a little bit as time goes on, and it gets a bit repetitive by the end, but it's still probably the best Cthulhu game.
He's awake in there. I can hear him moving about.
Break the door down, you damn fool.
The game suffers heavily from being buggy on PC, with the GOG version of the game being highly recommended since it seems pretty stable, as well as just seeking out your own patches and fixes to get it running somewhat smoothly.
Light him up! Light him up! Careful! Don't let the gun overheat! He's not taking enough damage! Get some headshots!
Choo Choo Charles is a light-hearted horror game based around a demonic spider train where you play as a conductor tasked with gathering eggs to prevent spread of further spider trains and stopping Charles permanently. The game's horror elements are pretty weak, but it's a fun game regardless.
I'm in hell.
Forget it. Abandon that memory. It's unproductive. Go to Wonderland.
I can't. I'm trapped in my past.
Sergeant, this girl's badly burned. Call for a doctor!
Alice Madness Returns is a platforming hack-and-slash game with a dark psychological horror story. You play as Alice Little, who's traumatized by the death of her family in a house fire and disappears into the warped and twisted world of Wonderland, which is being slowly corrupted.
I've not come back here looking for a fight.
Really? That's a pity. One's certainly looking for you.
The game balances platforming through its delightfully disturbing and surreal environments with some gory slashing up of enemies. Welcome to Hanwell is an open-world first-person horror game where you awaken in a morgue and try to figure out what happened on the empty and mysterious streets of the abandoned town of Hanwell. The game mostly features separate locations with scripted events in them and sporadic melee combat to split up exploring the streets.
Hey. Hey. Wait a minute. Hey.
Edward. You should have just died before. I wanted you to lay down and die.
A ghost?
Koudelka is a turn-based horror RPG about a group of people exploring a monastery for differing reasons, and uncover the dark secret of this supposed holy ground. The turn-based combat and gothic horror story are really the highlights. There aren't too many turn-based horror RPGs out there. There's also Shadow Hearts on PlayStation 2 you can move on to if you liked this game. That's the end of the games with the higher focus on combat. Some of them are a bit more focused than others, but let's move on to the games that contain more survival style mechanics. Lone Survivor is a side-scrolling survival horror game where you try and escape a post-apocalyptic nightmare, dealing with the unnamed main character's haunting past and the things it represents. The game's pixel art and soundtrack go a long way to making the game atmospheric, and its story is intriguing if a little confusing. The game was revamped with Super Lone Survivor in 2022, which is a deluxe version of the game. Deadly Premonition is a strange survival horror game where you play as FBI agent Francis York Morgan as he tries to uncover the killer of a young woman, as bizarre and supernatural things happen around town. The game is open world and features a lot of driving from location to location, with exploring and side quests available between. Its horror is odd and very dependent on your tastes. On Nintendo Switch is an updated version of the game entitled Deadly Premonition Origins for your perusal.
Something special. It's the epitome of the old frontier sheriff's office. Perfect. A stuffed deer's head on the wall. A flag, a hunting rifle. A hunting rifle. Amazing. You'd never see a hunting rifle on the wall of a police department in the city. That's just amazing. Wonder if the sheriff would ever let me shoot it.
The Forest is a single-player but also co-op horror game where you play as a survivor, whose plane crash on a lonely island costs them their son who's been abducted by the local cannibals. The game sees you try to save your son and uncover the dark secret that lurks underneath the island. The game's horror is mostly fueled by its survival and crafting, along with the unsettling way the cannibals act in relation to the things you do.
Nils? You okay?
Silent Hill Origins is a psychological horror prequel to the Silent Hill series and follows trucker Travis Grady as he saves a girl from a burning building and finds himself after the heroic deed unconscious in the foggy town of Silent Hill. The game uses a mostly found weapon style and works in similar to earlier Silent Hill titles, fighting off the nightmares and trying to find out what's going on.
Josh, wait! What the hell? You gotta be shitting me!
Silent Hill Homecoming follows Alex Shepard, a returning soldier from the war who finds his hometown has changed radically and so has his family. The game has a stronger emphasis on its combat and features some pretty striking visuals. The horror aspects are a bit weaker, but it's still a very good game. The PC version has audio problems that would need to be fixed with mods, so the console versions are recommended. Silent Hill Downpour follows Murphy Pendleton, an escaped convict who finds themselves in Silent Hill after their prison bus crashes, setting them free. It has a focus on exploration, and the game is different from the other Silent Hill games atmospherically, but has a unique vibe and features the same found weapon system as Silent Hill Origins. It has a great story, though its monster designs and combat are a bit lacking. Silent Hill 2 Remake is a third-person psychological horror game and reimagining of the original Silent Hill 2, following James Sunderland as he travels to the town of Silent Hill upon the request of a letter he received from his late wife. The game has a higher focus on combat than the original game and leads more into the expansive environments, and is excellent atmosphere and boss fights.
The world in peril from unseen foes. Darkness.
Eternal Darkness is a third-person cosmic horror game about a series of protagonists through time who play a part in stopping a grand scheme that started thousands of years ago to enslave humanity. The game is famous for its sanity system, and though some of the techniques are dated, they do still catch you off guard in certain situations. The game itself is a certified classic, and really a survival horror experience you need to try at least once.
At least I found the code.
Cold Fear is a third-person survival horror game that takes place on a Russian whaler where something horrible lurks below the decks. The dead crew are rising, and as a member of the Coast Guard you're tasked with finding survivors. The game's atmosphere, its rocking ship and cramped corridors, as well as its bloody violence, really give it its character. The Thing is a third-person survival horror game based on the John Carpenter movie of the same name. Following on from the events of the film, a rescue team arrive led by Captain Blake and find that the shape-shifting monster found in the film is far from dead.
What is that?
The game is squad-based paranoia that is only really let down by how predictable it is.
What the hell?
What do you think it is, Captain?
I don't know, and I don't care.
Looks like a goddamn UFO to me. This shit gives me the creeps.
Yeah, we're not alone in the universe and all that crap. Check it out and move on.
This is Officer Chambers from STARS Bravo team. Please identify yourself. Is someone there?
The government has announced that it has set out to of our department. But as of 2 years ago, when a several plans were set up, the local government stepped in and took over.
Resident Evil Zero is a prequel to the original game and features two characters you switch back and forth between, with the game having a higher focus on inventory management than the other games. The game has a great atmosphere but lacks the fear in comparison to the others.
No signs of life, but I feel like something's here.
Hey,
What happened?
I don't think we're alone.
Resident Evil Revelations follows Jill Valentine and Parker Luciani on board the USS Zenobia, where Chris Redfield has gone missing. The game is the midway point between classic Resident Evil and the more action-focused Resident Evil 5.
Let's just work this out. Oh, Barry, let's just work this.
Step it up a little. Give me some rage, for Christ's sakes.
Manhunt is a third-person stealth horror game where you play kill or be killed games against deranged and murderous gangs. Its dark world and gameplay are the main draw. Though the game is famous for its gore, it's still visceral and nasty today.
Not a thing. Fuck it.
I don't blame you hiding, because we're gonna stick you good. I know you're around here somewhere, you rat bastard.
Faith is a series of games with a retro style that puts you in the shoes of John Ward, a Catholic priest tasked with finishing a botched exorcism. The game takes place across 3 chapters, with the stakes rising each time. The story and dread are strong in these games. Witch Hunt is a first-person hunting game where you play as a witch hunter. The game features a large open area for you to explore whilst always feeling the pressure from the various monsters that are hunting you. Skinwalker Hunt is very similar to Witch Hunt, but provides many maps instead of the same one, and has you hunting skinwalkers while dealing with other supernatural problems, and has a bigger focus on survival. Night at the Gates of Hell is a first-person survival horror game where you play as David, who has to find other survivors in a zombie apocalypse. The game is pretty janky and poorly made in some sections, but feeds heavily from horror culture and is clearly made by people who love the genre. It walks the line between horror and comedy and sometimes falls over, but it's still an interesting game. Claire is a side-scrolling psychological horror game where you play as the eponymous Claire as she deals with nightmares from her past. The game primarily focuses on puzzle solving, and is very reminiscent of the Silent Hill games and even uses some of the same sound effects.
What the hell are those doctors up to?
Well, it looks like the rabbit's out of his cage. Return to your room, and you won't get hurt.
Galerians is a third-person survival horror game where you play as Rion, a boy who awakens in a hospital and finds he has psychic powers. The game has you searching for your lost sister and your lost memories.
This is my face? Who am I? How long have I been here?
It has a few jump scares, but primarily focuses on its unique story and the atmosphere of the world it creates.
Hello, Detective Tapp. I want to play a game.
Saw, the video game, is a game based on the movie franchise Saw, and has you played as the kidnapped detective that must break out of Jigsaw's cruel games by redeeming themselves and saving others. The game's horror comes from its deadly traps that can kill you in an instant and its time-sensitive puzzles.
I've gathered some clothes for you.
Haunting Ground is a psychological horror game where you play as Fiona, a girl who after a car crash awakens in a strange castle and quickly finds herself in trouble.
Beautiful, isn't it? That, my dear, is what you will become in the future. Go ahead.
The game is heavy on the psychological elements with some equally heavy themes at play. The gameplay, however, revolves around avoiding enemies and managing Fiona's stress levels. Lethal Company is a multiplayer horror game where you and your friends must collect items on random planetoids and sell them to the company you work for. The goal is to make a quota, and the various monsters and environmental hazards goal is to claim you and your friends' lives. The game can be genuinely terrifying, but it can also be hilariously funny as well. The Outlast Trials is a co-op first-person horror game where you and your friends are test subjects in an experimental facility run by deranged lunatics. The goal of completing tasks while not being killed by the various enemies and environmental hazards that constantly threaten to kill you and your friends.
Oh, you awful children.
Mother's friend?
No, wait.
Sheriff?
What the hell?
Show me the clicker.
Alan Wake 2 is a third-person survival horror game that follows on 13 years after the events of Alan Wake, and follows main protagonists FBI agent Saga Anderson and writer Alan Wake as they meet between worlds in a psychological horror experience unlike any other. The game tries a lot of unique things and often trails off into the artistic interpretations, but it's still a really incredible experience worth having.
What took you so long to pick up? Where are you? Are you alright? We're all dying waiting for you to get here. Thank God, Linda. What took you up? Where are you, alright? We're all dying waiting for you. We're all dying. We're all...
Dreadout is a third-person survival horror game where you play as Linda, a schoolgirl who gets trapped in a strange town after their school bus goes off track. The game is really bizarre but has some incredibly unsettling moments and some unique ideas that set it apart from other games. Crow Country is a third-person survival horror game where you play as Mara Forrest, an FBI agent sent to the abandoned theme park Crow Country to find the missing park owner, Edward Crow. The game is more about atmosphere than frightening moments, and the characters and story are quite endearing instead of horrifying, but it still has those moments and relies more on its survival gameplay, atmosphere and puzzles to keep things going. Cannibal Abduction is a short third-person horror game where you play as Henry, who finds himself locked inside the home of a deranged killer when he offers to fix their wardrobe. The game is primarily about stealth and hiding and solving item puzzles.
It was the first time that had ever happened. I touched the mirror and crossed over to the other side.
The Medium is a third-person psychological horror game where you play a spiritualist medium, Marianne, who can travel between worlds. She's drawn to an abandoned office building after a mysterious phone call and must solve the building's dark past, which ties into her own. The game is famous for using dual perspectives to show Marianne in both the real and spirit worlds at the same time, and features some really great artwork, but its gameplay leaves a little bit to be desired. You Will Die Here Tonight is an isometric survival horror game that turns to first person when you enter battle. You play as one of the 6 available police officers that are exploring the mansion. The game is primarily roguelike and can be quite punishing. Its survival elements are the main highlight, with its puzzle and atmosphere being a close second. Conscript is a harrowing isometric survival horror game that puts you through the 1916 trenches of World War I France. You play as a lone French soldier trying to find their brother in the death and madness of the war. The game can be particularly grueling and does so to reflect the hopelessness of the war itself. That said, it's also a really tense and atmospheric experience. Cover Your Eyes is a top-down RPG Maker horror game where you play as a retired police officer haunted by an apocalyptic event that sees her and her children terrorized by monsters as they try to escape the city. The game is pretty impressive for an RPG Maker game, and the devs really deserve some praise. Voyager 19 is a first-person management horror game where you explore the galaxy looking for habitable planets, whilst trying to balance the power available in your tiny one-person spaceship that's slowly running out of energy. The game does a lot with surprisingly little and contains a lot of surprises. Forbidden Siren is a third-person psychological horror game where a catastrophic event hits an abandoned village and several people get caught in its wake. The game's atmosphere is probably one of the most unique ever. It relies heavily on stealth and memorizing patterns, but suffers heavily due to how little of the game is telegraphed to the player. Guides are recommended to really enjoy the experience for what it is. That's the end of the more survival-focused horror games, and now it's on to games that are more focused on solving puzzles than dealing with enemies. Demonologist is a first-person multiplayer horror game where you investigate houses to expose and identify ghosts. The game is a bit more limiting than something like Phasmophobia and relies more on scripted events. It chooses to focus you on the same house until you've done well enough to move on in a leveling system that people may not always like. Dead Secret is a first-person horror game where you try and solve the mystery of who killed Harris Bullard, whilst a mysterious killer woodcutter follows you through the house. The goal is to solve the puzzles and figure out the dark secret before it's too late. Whilst not hugely scary, the game's atmosphere is really its strong suit, and its story is pretty engaging as you solve the story alongside the main character. The Last Door is a cosmic horror point-and-click game where you play as Jeremiah DeWitt, as he investigates another plane of existence after finding his childhood friend has died. The game's atmosphere is its strong point, but it does still have some frightening moments.
Where are you?
The Heilwald Loophole is a first-person psychological horror game where you are brought into the Heilwald Clinicum, which is filled with deranged patients and equally disturbed doctors. The goal is to experiment with sequences and possible options in the areas to find other exits and items that lead to progression, with the areas resetting after you leave. The game's horror comes from its bizarre nature and its various creepy events.
Don't you fucking season me!
I'm back, Ellen.
Oh, sweet Jesus! It's him!
You thought you had blocked me out of your memory forever, except for those inconvenient attacks of hysteria every now and then. But I've returned for you.
The yellow!
Ah, yes. My calling card. Always the yellow jacket, the yellow boots. My maintenance man disguise gave me access to office buildings all over Manhattan. Not just yours.
I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a psychological horror point-and-click game where you play as the last surviving humans who have been tormented by a deranged and hateful artificial intelligence called Am. The characters must pass through challenges made by Am on their fatal flaws and the things that haunt them.
It is difficult to see what purpose this surgery serves other than to mutilate the patient.
Wait!
Goodbye, my love.
She's gone.
Not gone, Querent. Nearly dead. Again and again she comes to this well, to weep and leap at the sound of the shriek. Which of you will save the other?
Strangeland is a point-and-click psychological horror game that follows an unnamed protagonist through an abstract and surreal world designed to torment him as he tries desperately to save the girl who seems destined to die.
I don't have anything to say to her.
Wow. This must be Carno's family tree.
Phantasmagoria is an FMV point-and-click horror game where you play as Adrienne Delaney, a writer who moves into a mansion with her husband. When she releases an evil spirit whilst exploring the house, things take a sudden turn and strange things start happening around the home. The game's age does hold back certain things, but its practical effects and its FMV sequences are still impressive if a little cheesy. Frambeau is a point-and-click psychological horror game where you play as 10-year-old Frambeau, a girl tormented by the death of her parents and the loss of her cat. The game goes off on a wild tangent, with Fran being able to switch between the seemingly real world and the world the tablets her doctor gave her shows her, primarily solving puzzles and helping people whilst being hunted by her past. The game deals with a lot of heavy themes and features a creepy art style. The Excavation of Hobbs Barrow is a point-and-click folk horror game that follows Thomasina Bateman, an archaeologist in Victorian England, as she summoned to the remote village of Bewley to investigate Hobbs Barrow, but upon arriving she finds the person who invited her is missing and something seems wrong. The game is very slow burn and doesn't reveal anything straight away.
Goodness me.
Dracula the Resurrection is a point-and-click horror game based on Bram Stoker's Dracula, where you play as Jonathan Harker and try and find your abducted wife at the suspected hands of Dracula. The game's very atmosphere heavy, and despite some bizarre choices and the age of the game, it's still a unique experience. The Horror of Salazar House is a retro-inspired point-and-click horror game where you as a reporter explore Salazar House and try to uncover the mystery that lurks there and what happened to the family that lived inside. The game has a lot of surprises and mechanics that are cleverly implemented into its retro design. Silent Hill Shattered Memories is a reimagining of the original Silent Hill and follows Harry Mason as he travels through the eponymous town searching for his missing daughter Cheryl. The game is unique in the way that it tries to psychologically profile you as you play and uses your choices in the therapy sessions to pave your way for the rest of the game. It doesn't feature combat, instead opting for chase sequences. From the Darkness is a first-person psychological horror game that follows a man who's returned to his late grandfather's house to collect the family photo album when he gets trapped inside by a demonic spirit, warping the house. The game mostly focuses on a linear series of events and gets you to solve puzzles to progress. Its scripted events and atmosphere can be absolutely terrifying.
Where did he go?
As if the bookcase has been moved several times. Do you really think that your fugitive came in here? I don't see any way out.
It looks like an old Seaway map.
Call of Cthulhu is a first-person horror game with RPG elements that follows the Cthulhu mythos more than the literal story that it's named after, and sees you playing as investigator Edward Pierce through a journey on Darkwater Island after he's hired to find out what really happened to the Hawkins family. The game's atmosphere is great, but it certainly has flaws with some of its RPG elements and choose-your-own-adventure storytelling, leading to the game feeling like parts of it are missing, depending on your choices.
A little mouse has got lost on our turf. You're not only inquisitive, you're also stupid. What gave you the crazy idea to come onto my turf?
That's it for the puzzle games, and now we're on to the final part of the video where we're going to look at games that mainly focus on the story. Echo Night Beyond is set on the moon after a space shuttle crash and sees you walking around solving the problems of deceased ghosts while monitoring your heart rate. Whilst the game can be very slow, it has great sound design and atmosphere, and some pretty scary sections too. Mouthwashing is a first-person story-driven game where you play as two different protagonists set before and after the crash of the spaceship they're travelling on, and the unravelling fates of the crew that were trapped together for the ride. It's a frankly incredible experience that if you're into psychological horror, you really need to experience.
Oh, Jesus, don't fuck it up now. In order. Come on.
Still Wakes the Deep takes place on a Scottish oil rig in the 1970s when a catastrophic event turns everyone's lives upside down, and you, as electrician Kaz McCleary, have to try and make it out of the nightmare alive. The game mainly focuses on stealth and experiencing the game's events and witnessing the lives of the people you encounter throughout the game.
Shite! Fucking see again.
The Complex Found Footage is a free experimental game where you explore a series of rooms in the Backrooms universe. The game's atmosphere is the game's selling point, along with the unique feelings that comes along with it.
Something's off. You seeing this?
shockwaves hit 6 minutes later, striking the south face of the hab first and hardest. 27 minutes in, with that kind of concussive force, even the sealed modules were compromised.
Narcosis is a first-person, narrative-driven game where you play as a deep-sea diver who, after an earthquake, is left to fend for themselves on the ocean floor, where oxygen is limited. The game is narrated over as an interviewer talks to a survivor of the disaster, which punctuates the gameplay. The story is pretty interesting and does a really good job keeping the game going.
In the psychology of the modern civilized human being, it is difficult to overstate the significance of the house. Since as early as the Neolithic era, humankind has defined their dead. Of all the structures that mankind has invented for itself, there is little doubt that the house is that which it relies upon most completely for its continued survival.
Anatomy is a first-person experimental horror game that follows along a unique concept and has tape recordings explain the idea to you as the situation keeps on paralleling the idea, with the game restarting multiple times until it literally devolves into madness. The Closing Shift is a J-horror game by Chiller's Art that has you playing as a barista who thinks she's being stalked by one of her customers. The game has quite an in-depth coffee-making minigame to keep you distracted by the paranoia that's waiting for you when your shift is over. Night Security is another Chiller's Art game where you're playing as a night security guard on the night shift in a cursed office building. The game has a lot of unique events and an incredible atmosphere. The Convenience Store is yet another Chiller's Art game where you're a convenience store clerk who experiences paranormal things going on in the store. The game has some pretty intense moments. Rewind or Die follows a videotape store clerk as his life is turned into a nightmare and he encounters a murderous pig-headed killer and is locked up in this slaughterhouse. The game doesn't take itself too seriously and is mostly just a bit of fun.
It still works.
Who is this? How'd you get this frequency?
Don't you recognize me?
Adam?
Yes. Well, what's left of me? Dad.
Observer is a futuristic first-person horror game where you play as Dan Lazarski, a mind delver, who can search the memories of people to find out the truth, and he uses his power to uncover what's happened to his son. The game uses trippy visuals and surreal segments to inflict the feeling of fear and loss through its scenarios. The story is bleak, but the setting is unique.
Neural interrogation.
Hey, baby, I'm home. Run, Alice! Run! Halt! Bullet, run! Shit!
Blair Witch is another expansion on the Blair Witch Project universe and follows Ellis and his service dog Bullet as they both travel into the Maryland woods to find out what happened to a missing boy. The game leans heavily into scripted events and psychological horror, but does suffer from repetition and a lack of direction for some of the game. Concluse is a bizarre experimental game where you play as a man who travels to a mysterious town to find his missing wife. The game's atmosphere is incredibly unique, channeling things like David Lynch's Eraserhead, though some of it may be a little too bizarre to make sense. Paratopic is a short first-person game where you play as seemingly multiple characters and a story based around videotapes and strange things lurking in the forest. The game is deliberately hard to understand and can be interpreted in many different ways.
I often helped Viola in the schoolhouse. I enjoyed working with the children. We taught them reading, writing, scripture. Viola was one of the most faithful among us. If Anne was like the mother of the flock, Viola was the older sister. I remember one lecture she gave the children on the nature of hell that was so vivid, so unflinching, it had the kids in tears. I told her she was scaring them, and she said, "Good, they should be scared."
Sagebrush is a short but profound first-person horror game where you play as a woman returning to the compound of a cult that she joined, reliving her past and exploring the secrets that lie there.
We discovered the first bodies by the pine trees.
A makeshift campfire suggested they tried to warm up. The bodies were only in underwear. I decided to thoroughly search the area between the tent and the tree line. I discovered the other bodies every few hundred meters apart. Their position indicated the victims attempted to return to the tent as fast as they could. This could mean that the threat was gone and the group decided to go back to the tent, or just the opposite. Someone or something appeared from the forest and forced its victims to run.
Kholat is a first-person exploration game where you follow in the footsteps of the fateful Dyatlov Pass incident and explore the supposed valley where they all died. The game provides a different explanation of what happened and lets you experience paranormal events whilst you explore the valley looking for story pieces. Undawn is a first-person horror game where you play as Kurden, a young man returning to his home on the Swiss Alps after the death of his grandfather. When he returns, he experiences supernatural goings-on before getting embroiled in the village's dark past. The game is wonderfully unique and contains RPG mechanics as well as a lot of endearing things and its unique art style.
What's with this place? Why all the sticky notes?
Loser! Stupid! Liar! Crazy! Cry baby! Ugly! I hate you, dumb! Go away!
Silent Hill: The Short Message is a free psychological horror game where you play as a teen haunted by social media whilst exploring some abandoned apartments. The game is divisive among Silent Hill fans, and if it wasn't free I wouldn't be recommending it.
What's going on? Oh my god! No, no, no!
The Alien Cube is a first-person narrative-driven game where you, after experiencing a meteor crash, find your life is turned upside down and your family is involved in something far larger. The game is mostly walking around and picking up notes to explain the story, which leans further into cosmic horror the further you go.
That voice. It's calling me.
My name is Susan Ashworth. I live alone in this old 2-bedroom flat. I rarely go outside. Some would say it's a lonely life, and I guess that's true, but I don't like people's company. Not lately, anyway.
The Cat Lady is a side-scrolling, narrative-driven game where you play as Susan Ashworth, who, after attempting to take her own life, is transported into another realm and told to hunt down parasites for the mysterious Queen of Maggots. The story is really great and overshadows its limited shortcomings.
Ruby. She went feral the other night. Just like Destiny.
Burnhouse Lane is another side-scrolling narrative-driven game by the people who made The Cat Lady, where you play as Angie Weather, a woman diagnosed with a terminal illness who ends up on the twisted streets of Burnhouse Lane, confronted by some surreal forces. This concludes this installment of the Beginner's Guide. It may be a long time before the next part comes out, and you'll have to bear with me as I really need to play more games myself. I just want to take a moment to let you all know that I really appreciate the support the channel gets, and as a single person making content with a job on the side, things like supporting me on Patreon means a great deal. Holding on to ideals on something like YouTube seems to be ill-advised, but I still refuse to run adverts and would rather make videos I want to make without worrying about advertisers or censorship or YouTube getting mad at me. This video is a guide to help people, and if you found something you really like, feel free to join the Discord to tell the group about it, or if you want to support me on Patreon to make more videos like this, you can join for free and support me if you so desire. Thank you all again, and I will see you next time.